Welcome back, my friends. Currently, we're on day 213 of Russia's disastrous invasion of Ukraine, and in this video, I'm going to make the argument that I don't think the Ukrainian military can win this war attacking on the ground. Now, I still think Ukraine is going to win. I'll explain exactly how in this video, but Russia has really complicated the war by announcing their partial military mobilization. We now know this to be a lie. The Kremlin announced to their people that 300,000 Russian men would be drafted into the army. But we've now received reports from Medusa citing a source close to federal ministries. And of course, there are bureaucrats in the Kremlin that know the true number, and they've leaked it to the Western press. So we now know that about 1.2 million Russian men are being rushed into the army and are going to be sent to Ukraine. And even if they're poorly equipped, poorly trained, and poorly motivated, that's still an additional 1 million men in the trenches, in the cities, manning the occupied territories. So for the Ukrainian military to successfully attack and push this million-man army out, the casualties that the Ukrainians would experience would be in the hundreds of thousands. It would be absolutely devastating. But luckily, there is another way to win this war. I want to explain how to do that. And to understand modern nations and their bases of support, the military base is actually at the top. And in order to defeat the military, you can take out their base of support, being the next pillar down. This is the political base. At any point in the last 6 or 7 months, somebody could have taken out Putin and replaced him and then said, our military's not doing this anymore. We're going to pull back to Russia's 2014 borders. Unfortunately, Putin the last 22 years did a really good job of liquidating anyone that might betray him, anyone that might oppose him. So the political base is looking pretty strong. So in order to defeat Russia's military, we have to go one level down and knock out the economic base for the entire Russian state. This will cause a political collapse, which in turn will cause a military collapse. And this is what I've been arguing on my channel all summer. Over 3 months ago, I made this video titled, "This Man Will Defeat Russia." It's gotten 429,000 views. I'll link it down below. I highly recommend watching it for a more detailed explanation. But in a nutshell, this is what you need to know. Russia's economic weak point is the price of their exports. It's how they fund their government. It's how they fund their military. And this is Russia's main exports: crude petroleum, refined petroleum, coal, natural gas, iron, gold, platinum, copper, diamonds. So in order to defeat Russia, we have to first bankrupt their entire economy. And the best way to do this is to cause the price of their exports to completely collapse. Yes, the West has put sanctions. They say they're not going to buy Russia's exports. But we know somewhere in the world, someone is going to continue buying. So what we need is for the price to collapse to the point where Russia can no longer pay for their government, no longer pay for their military. And this is what is currently happening indirectly. This week, the United States Federal Reserve met and they announced another 0.75 of a percentage point hike in their federal interest rate. And they're doing this to combat inflation. Inflation across the globe is out of control. The Fed needs to raise interest rates anyways, but an added benefit of doing this is that it will kill global consumer demand for Russia's exports. This will cause the price of energy and the price of commodities to collapse when Russia really needs this money. So here is the federal funds effective rate, currently 2.3. The Fed raised it 0.75 this week, so it is now over 3%. The Fed is going to meet 2 more times this year, so the federal funds effective rate in the United States, the world's largest economy, is going to be over 4%, closer to 5% by the end of this year. What does this mean? It means that it's more difficult, more expensive to borrow money. If it's more expensive to borrow money, you can't as easily buy a house, you can't as easily buy a car, you can't as easily start a small business and get a small business loan. What this does is it slows down economic activity. Slowing down economic activity in turn kills global consumer demand. And central banks across the world are doing the exact same thing. Just this week, the Bank of England hiked their rates by 50 basis points. The Swiss central bank also increased their interest rate by 75. And all of the world's leading economies are doing the exact same thing. The central banks of Australia, Canada, Japan, South Korea, the EU, everyone is raising interest rates to get inflation under control, and this is more than likely going to trigger a global recession. I don't think any continents will be spared. Recession in Europe, recession in Asia, recession in North America. And this is going to severely cripple the Russian government and the Russian economy, as Russia's income from energy already hit a 14-month low in August as Moscow continues to dump their oil exports at discounted prices. And the number in August is only going to get worse in September when we get those numbers. It's going to get worse in October. It's going to get worse in November. Russia, prior to this summer, had a budget surplus thanks to their energy and commodity exports, but their surplus has already evaporated and tanked in August amid sanctions and slowing natural gas supplies to Europe. Everyone in the comments section is always saying, Jake, the price of natural gas is still high. But this doesn't matter to Russia if Russia can't export their natural gas. Natural gas is a byproduct of pumping for oil, and it's very difficult to store and very difficult to export if you don't have the pipe infrastructure to do so. So currently in Russia's oil fields, they don't have anywhere to put their natural gas, and they're no longer selling it to Germany through the Nord Stream pipeline. So all that Russia can do is burn it off, to flare it. Russia is literally setting their money supply on fire because they chose to fight this war. And the Russian government is already taking steps to try and stop the hemorrhaging, as the government cut spending by 10% after their proven summer revenue slump. And Russia cannot afford to run deficits because nobody in the world right now is willing to loan them money. They've been cut off from Western bond markets, and when you look like you're losing a war, other people are not so eager to loan you money. So I don't see the Chinese or the Indians or the Brazilians willing to loan Russia money when, if they experience a political revolution in the next year, that money might never be paid back. Another compounding problem for Russia's economy right now is actually severely low unemployment. Now, normally in an advanced developed economy, you want a low unemployment rate. You want everyone who wants to work a job be able to find a job. But Russia's unemployment rate currently is at 3.9%, not because their economy is doing great and everyone is expanding and everyone is hiring. Russia's unemployment rate is low because people are leaving the labor force. Russia is I don't know a better word, but a dying, aging society. When you look at their population pyramid, their population demographics, you can see that there are 5.8 million Russian women between the ages of 60 and 64, getting close to retirement, too old to work, aging, and developing health complications. While Russian women between the ages of 20 and 24, there's only 3.2 million of them. These are the people who need to be working jobs, paying taxes, having babies, raising a family. Russia's population peaked when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, and it's been declining ever since. Nobody in Russia wants to have kids. Additionally, Russia's unemployment rate is so low because hundreds of thousands of Russians over the last 7 months have fled the country. And mostly these are younger, highly educated, wealthier individuals. So let's say doctors and engineers and scientists. These are the people who have been fleeing Putin's regime, knowing what was coming. That is also what is contributing to Russia's low unemployment rate. Now, let's factor in mobilization of 1.2 million able-bodied men being forced to go to the army. And Russia's unemployment rate is actually going to go lower. And this causes severe stagflation. Russia's economy, their GDP, is both contracting while the price of everything is going up. If you can't find workers, you have to offer higher wages to attract them. To offer higher wages, you have to increase the prices of your products and services. So everyone in Russia is experiencing very high inflation for basic goods and services, as they are experiencing a severe shortage of labor and manpower in the country. So let's now switch to the oil map because this gets people excited. This is the price of West Texas Intermediate crude, and on Friday the price of oil dropped by almost 5%. So here's the chart, and prior to the war, 7 months ago in February, the price of a barrel of oil was $91. This spiked as high as $122 in early June. This was making everyone concerned because Russia was getting a good price for their energy exports. But as central banks around the world continue to raise interest rates and global demand for energy has been dropping, the price of oil has been dropping, and it's only going lower. I know there are several different prices for oil around the world. Here's ICE Brent. This is what is traded in the North Sea. And yes, it's a different price at $86, but it's the same trend. It peaked in early June, and it's only been declining the last 3 or 4 months. We can also look up the price of Urals oil. This is what is being traded out of Russia. They have to trade it at a discount to this price in order to convince the Chinese and the Indians to buy it. But it's the same trend. It peaked in early June, and the price has only been falling. And what is the true break-even cost for Russia to produce a barrel of oil? And prior to the war, this was estimated at around $30 to $40 per barrel. So if the price of oil dropped down to 40, basically they're making no profit at all, and they shouldn't even be producing. However, this break-even cost of between $30 and $40 a barrel, this was prior to Western companies, Western engineers and experts, and Western capital pulling out of Russia. There are lots of indications that the Russian energy sector has been struggling as they cannot obtain parts and expertise from Western oil energy companies such as Royal Dutch Shell, BP, or ExxonMobil. So it's very possible that their break-even price for a barrel of oil has gone up over the last 7 months, meaning that as their costs go up and the price they can get for it goes down, at some point Russia is just going to be pumping at a loss, and there's really no point. So this is the master plan to defeat the Russian military. I think Western economists and Western military leaders have known this the last 7 months, that if you can destroy the Russian economy, this will cause a political revolution, which will lead to the Russian military withdrawing from Ukraine in defeat. So here are the 4 most likely ways that I see this war ending at some point over the next year. Number 1, the FSB removes Putin and takes control. 2, the military removes Putin and takes control. 3, protesters in Moscow reach a critical mass and they're able to storm the Kremlin and overthrow the government, and some kind of civilian coalition takes control in Moscow. Finally, number 4, Russia just breaks up and regional warlords in the provinces all declare independence, all declare that they are their own sovereign states. So for fun, let's just quickly go through all 4 of these scenarios because these are my predictions. The probability of each is slightly different, but I think that this conflict in Ukraine will end in one of these 4 ways. The first one, and probably the most likely, is that someone from the FSB, this is Russia's intelligence agencies, they'll just remove Putin from power and take control. The Kremlin will go radio silent for about 48 hours, and then some man that maybe we don't even know in a really nice suit will come forward to the podium, make a statement, and say, sorry, Putin and the military got out of control this last year. We've liquidated them. The situation is under control. We'll retreat to the 2014 borders if you recognize me as the new sovereign of Russia. I think in this scenario, the FSB would try to pull the military back to Crimea and hold the peninsula, but they would go to the negotiating table and say, if you recognize us as the new legitimate government of Russia, we'll end this conflict. The next scenario, I think, is the least likely, but this would be the Russian military takes action and removes Putin from power and takes over. Shoigu is an engineer by trade and actually has no military experience, so Putin has been very careful to load up senior Russian military ranks with sock puppets that can't think for themselves. But if this does somehow successfully happen, someone in a military uniform, after 48 hours of radio silence from the Kremlin, they would step up to the podium and say, Putin and the FSB got out of control, we've liquidated them, the situation is under control. At this point, they probably would also try to retreat back to 2014 borders and hold Crimea, trying to get an armistice. They'll probably also announce that elections will be held soon. The next scenario, which I think is probably the second most likely, is that protesters in Moscow reach a critical mass comparable to what the Ukrainians did in their Revolution of Dignity, and they storm the Kremlin, and there's a lot of chaos and confusion. This would be very violent and deadly, but somebody, some civilian, would come forward to the podium and make an announcement to the world saying, sorry, Putin, the FSB, and the military all got out of control. We've liquidated them. The situation is being handled. I think in this scenario, they probably would retreat back Russian forces back to their own borders, concede Crimea, and just try and settle their own affairs. They'll announce elections of some kind in order to replace their civilian government. The next way this war could end is that Russia just disintegrates. The economic chaos and the protests and rioting become so severe that the regional administrators, the regional powers, just say, this isn't worth it anymore, and we're going to do our own thing. We're going to declare independence. And warlords would just take over these provinces. They would declare none of our people will participate in Moscow's war anymore, F you Putin, and they would tell the West, if you supplied us aid and recognize our independence, we'll never talk to Moscow again. This scenario is the most frightening because what would happen is the warlords in these regional areas would just nationalize all of the Russian military forces and Russian military equipment in that region. And Russia has nuclear weapons spread out across all of their territory. So these individual new republics that would form would all become nuclear states. Now you might be saying, well, Jake, the West would put pressure on them to give up their nukes in order to receive aid or recognition. The problem is that the lesson we've learned from Ukraine, because Ukraine had nuclear weapons in 1993 and 1994. The lesson that Russia has demonstrated is that if you give up your nukes, Russia is going to attack you, and then they're going to threaten you with nuclear weapons. So this is a very dangerous scenario. This would be very chaotic. I think this scenario would lead to the most threat to global security, as these new breakaway republics would be fighting each other, possibly with nuclear weapons, in order to gain control over Russia's resources, like their oil fields and their diamond mines and their coal deposits. I think that would become the commodities are what these new republics would be fighting over. So those are my 4 theories. We've got pure nightmare fuel to keep you awake at night. We don't know how this is going to end, but as winter is approaching, what I would advise to the Ukrainian military is to build really good defensive positions. Don't let the Russians advance, and then just let them kind of languish and suffer this winter, as they're going to be struggling to feed their soldiers, struggling to keep their soldiers from dying in the cold. And all the meanwhile, the West will continue supplying Ukraine weapons necessary to disrupt and destroy the Russian military. How do you deal with a 1 million man Russian mobilized army? Well, Lockheed Martin has the perfect tool for this. This is the M30A1A2 GMLS rockets for the M270 and the HIMARS system. These weapons are precise, fast, accurate, and brutal. Here is a Lockheed Martin commercial or demonstration video showing how these rockets with 182,000 preformed tungsten fragments shred everything on impact. Let's end this video with a moment of zen, just admiring how amazing these GMLS rockets are. That's all for this update video. Glory to the heroes, glory to Ukraine. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support my channel. Comments or questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, take care, be safe.